Hey, everybody. Welcome. And there's Nick Paro. Welcome to the Media Network and the Salts Politics Substack. I'm here with my friend Nick Paro, who has been doing the Lord's work recently. Well, always. You should read Nick's Substack, which we'll talk about in a minute. But I want to talk, Nick, about your project, which I think is so important and has not gotten the attention that it needs, which is the Trump administration's attack on the disabled community and on communities that are incredibly vulnerable. And there's so many of them, we can go on and on. But in particular, what they're trying to do with the Americans with Disabilities Act, which you've been writing about extensively and working on, and which is under attack. I remember when that law got passed, Bob Dole sponsored it, I believe. It was a monumental, and George Bush signed it into law. So this is not some liberal hippy-dippy law. It is a law that was supported by both sides of the aisle, because both sides of the aisle at one point understood that eugenics are not what this country is about, and that we should help people who have disabilities. And by the way, disabilities is a really broad swath of people, and I think a lot of us think it's people who may not be able to walk, or people who are have to be group homes because of any kind of issues that they have. It's not. Disabilities affect people who are dyslexic, or have ADHD, or have anxiety, or things that are so common now that either you have it yourself, or some member of your family has it, or somebody who you're very close to has it. And so I don't know the exact numbers, Nick, you might, but I would venture to say it's probably the majority of the people in this country.
It's over half the population of the country. It's over half the population of the world. I don't have exact numbers on me, but from what I have been reading and seeing, and it's invisibility. There's a lot of invisibility in disability. And we're trying to make it visible.
Yeah. And I'm so glad you are. And I'm so glad that we're talking about this, because this is something that just is not getting the kind of, with everything else happening, it's just not getting the kind of attention in mainstream media that it should. But it should, because it affects you, or somebody you know, or love, or care about. So with that, Nick, why don't you tell folks what is going on with this administration and how they're attacking? And by the way, you're a veteran, so it's not just the broad community of people in this country. It's also specifically people who are in the armed services and elsewhere. So why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Well, first off, thanks, Julie, for having me on. I appreciate you giving me this and the disability community for democracy, this space to be able to speak on this. And so there is an ongoing effort now by the regime, the occupant of the White House, and his gang of thugs, who are trying to reenact what we're calling Crip Crow. And so what came out there was a DOJ policy memo that came out on June 18th that threatened to roll back the 1999 Olmstead decision, which ends forced institutionalization by states and territories and requires that states and territories provide the least restrictive care necessary for people with disabilities. So it enabled at-home care. It enabled inpatient and outpatient services without the risk of you being put there forever, against your will, against your provider's will. It also supported and provided a legal avenue for states to end segregation and discrimination in schools against kids with disabilities. And this is really what allowed children to get full and equitable educations. This ties in with things like 504 and IEPs and the IDEA plan, and all of those previous enactments to codify our rights. But this one was Olmstead itself is just a Supreme Court decision with no law truly backing it up. And so I've partnered on Sick of the Shit publications with the Disability Community for Democracy, a group organized by my good friend Naida Green. She's the founder and CEO. And we are advocating to say no to Crip Crow.
And
And we,
explain what Crip Crow is, because I don't think people are familiar with that term.
yeah, so I'm probably not the best person to talk about the definition behind it in the end. Naida knows the history much better than I do. It is a term from the Black disability community, specifically about, it started as Jim Crip Crow or similar. And so it evokes the Jim Crow era disenfranchisement, the segregation, the fears and the anxiety for it. So that is the overarching of it. Naida could probably does talk much more eloquently on where the history of Crip Crow came from and why it's really important. And it's also a useful tool, because when people hear Crip Crow, it engages you right away. There's this feeling that you get when you hear that and you're like, ooh, I don't like that for some reason. And that's kind of the point, is we want people actively hearing what's going on and seeing it, because there's a lot of, like you said right at the beginning, there's a lot of invisibility with disability. And being Disability Pride Month right now, which not many people know about. I didn't even know it was Disability Pride Month until I was told. And I'm glad I was, because it's another invisibility that we're trying to break down, and bring visibility. So we're coordinating this effort around getting people to make actionable calls, emails, and discussion to their federal legislators, because we know that public pressure works. We know that sustained and engaged public pressure by humans, not by bots, not by automated tools, but by humans, really makes a big difference and forces Congress to act. And if they don't act, it also leaves a trail that they ignored the people and they ignored what we wanted. And it gives us power to continue building this effort to get this legislation changed.
Yeah. So let's talk about what the Trump administration is doing, and how they're trying to upend decades of precedent, a court decision. And, I'm very loath to constantly or ever really compare Donald Trump to the Third Reich, because Adolf Hitler is Adolf Hitler, and there is no comparison. Yeah. But there is a history in this country, as well as in authoritarian countries like the Soviet Union, like Nazi Germany, and others, but also in this country, of institutionalizing people based on very, very flimsy evidence.
Especially our country.
Right.
Especially our country. We have, and I like to talk about this with people that I come on these interviews with, is this is not a Nazi problem. This is not a Russia problem. Everybody has this problem. And this is a very American issue, is the idea of eugenics and what this administration is trying to do. And so going into what they're doing right now. So the US has a history of labeling dissent or Blacks getting freedom who wanted to run away as mental disorders, as a disabling effect that requires either whipping or cutting the toes off of, or imprisonment or institutionalization. We have protest psychosis as a registered disability still. Like we have some really bad history in our country of assigning dissent as a crime. Even though we're supposed to have free speech and the ability to dissent. And so what this is doing is it is opening the door. This is not just about disability rights. What is happening is, and it was outed by Bloomberg that Stephen Miller was behind this DOJ memo, which isn't a surprise in any way, shape, or form. And so on June 18th, I'll read from our website. We have a website called broadbanner.com/crip-crow. I would put it into the chat, but my internet's being funky and I can't actually see the chat on the Substack side or any of the sides. So I apologize for
I'll
that,
do
friends.
it. I'll do
Okay,
it.
thank you. And so on June 18th, right before Juneteenth, the night before they released the policy memo titled Application of the Rehabilitation Act and Americans with Disabilities Act to State Institutionalization of Patients with Severe Mental Illness or Disabilities. And all it is doing is undercutting the Supreme Court precedent and standards set in Olmstead. What we're seeing now is a coordinated effort over this entire regime and over Trump's entire second presidency to criminalize various forms of either dissent or homelessness and substance abuse. And last year there was a House, I believe, a House commission set out to study Trump derangement syndrome and have that labeled as a disability that would require institutionalization. And so it is taking our voices and turning them into criminalized acts. And so there's a targeted effort that they're doing, starting with criminalizing homelessness, which impacted veterans and civilians, who many of whom have disabilities, and they're just left out of the system and they're no longer part of the system. They're just given up on. And so now we've criminalized that. And substance abuse, instead of offering support and aid, now it's become criminalized, and it's all in an effort to make those of us who are, I guess, non-productive or not with the regime disappear in different ways. And so this is just the next step in that, as well as it fits right alongside Texas's Section 504 lawsuit that is attempting to remove 504 protections for our children to ensure that they have adequate and equitable access to education needs. And so there's a coordinated effort across state and federal level right now to undermine disability rights as a whole.
I mean, what you said about Trump derangement syndrome is so interesting to me, because this is I come from the Soviet Union, and both the Soviets and the Russians right now, what they do very well is that if you are a opponent of the regime, so to speak, you are deemed insane and you're locked up in institutions. They call them insane asylums there, that are worse than being in prison. I mean, purposely so. They drug you, they give you hallucinogenics, and so that by the time if you ever leave, you do have issues that you that you
now have substance abuse issues and other things.
Yeah, not just substance abuse. You are at the point where really you're mentally unwell, because they have given you so many drugs that your brain is rewired.
And we have the history of doing that exact same thing here in the States too.
Yeah. And I think we all live our lives kind of thinking about the knock on the door and what happens if you end up in prison for anything you said. It's something that I never would have thought was a real possibility, but I think now we all need to consider it. But there's something worse than that. There's something worse than that. And that is what I just described. Like, I would take prison over that, because I've had members of my family who went through that in the Soviet Union. And so I can tell you it is worse. It is worse. I had an aunt who was mentally disabled for real, not because somebody drugged her. And the reason that she never got help there, and the reason my grandmother, who was a doctor, was able to take care of her, is precisely because it would make you worse if you were placed in an institution like that. And so I am very passionate about this issue for folks who maybe are hearing about it for the first time, because I know where this can lead. And as you point out, in this country, we also know where it has led before. I mean, women were sterilized against their will because they were perceived to be nymphomaniacs. I use that word, loosely, because their husbands did not want them around. And that was one good way of getting rid of your wife. if you were opposed to wars that the country was behind or other things, you were deemed, mentally unwell. And then there are people who really are unwell because they're unwell. And as I say, you could be unwell, which means that you really do have issues with mental health, but also they would consider unwell um, anybody who has anxiety, or anybody who has ADHD, or anybody who has dyslexia, or any kinds of things that are so prevalent that they're not. I'm not sure why dyslexia is considered a disability. It's actually a superpower for a lot of people. The only reason it is so that people can get extra help in school. But it's not really a disability in the sense that we think about. But yet it's classified that way in some cases for good reason. And so, PTSD, which so many veterans have. John Fetterman, like him or hate him, just went through something really awful, and had to get help. And there's no shame in that. Actually, the one good thing that I think he's done is talk about how he had to get help. I think he regrets doing that, he said. But, Tom Kean Jr., a Republican congressman from New Jersey, just disappeared for 3 months, it turns out, because he was getting help for depression. That's all to the good that we're talking about this. But this is going to create a situation for people where they're not only going to be afraid to talk about it because they don't want to be classified that way and, God forbid, institutionalized, but it's also going to lead to people not getting the help they need because they're going to be worried about them being institutionalized against their will. That's going to it's going to lead to suicide among children and adults, but especially among our kids, depression. If you're now going to institutionalize kids who are trans, or it will not stop with trans kids, it'll lead to people who are LGBT, gay and lesbian kids. There's all sorts of things that the ramifications of this are so awful that I don't think people are actually considering how awful it is. And, I think what Trump, just to finish the thought, what Trump uses all the time is, you go in New York, I live in New York, you walk down the streets of New York City, and there are people who are mentally ill, and it is an inconvenience because sometimes you're afraid to ride the subway, or you're afraid to walk down the street because a lot of these people are mentally ill and they tend to be violent. I want to get to that in a minute, but the reality is that that's who Trump uses as examples. And people are like, oh, okay, I can get behind that, so on. I think Nick's internet just went out for a second, but the reality is it's not just getting behind that for that purpose. It's also getting behind that in a much broader way that I just talked about, which is insane. Not to, it's a crazy way to look at things and to treat people that way. And for anybody who wants to get help and is worried about getting help, understand that this is now impacting you, and impacting your consideration as to whether you need and can get the help that you need. So, I think that's what Nick is doing is so important, and it's something that is so important for people to focus on. And I'm horrified, actually, that this isn't among all the other injustices of the Trump administration, that this isn't something that is talked about more on the pages of the New York Times, on MS Now, on CNN, because it impacts all of us or somebody that we love. So, and yes, Ms. Banks, I'm going to put this up. It'll lobby to prevent anyone, you're back. Anyone who's LGBTQ with any contact with any kids, including their own, that's absolutely right. They will come up with any excuse. So, Nick, I've been talking and monologuing for a while because your internet's been out.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, I don't know how much of that you heard, but whatever reaction you have or anything you want to add, I think is really critical to please.
Yeah, no, I really want to dig into on the veteran side, where I last heard you were talking about the suicide rates and suicide. And to be honest, so for anyone who doesn't know about me, I'm a disabled veteran. I'm a fully disabled veteran. I work from home. I'm fully supported in a lot of ways through the veteran system and disability income from the veteran side. I do all of my healthcare through the VA. And there is a real fear now for me, and I'm not the only veteran who's feeling this way. There's a real fear that if I go into the VA, that I may not come out. There's a fear that if I talk to my mental health providers openly about what is going on in my life or issues that I'm trying to work through, that even if they want it to stay private as a provider, it won't. And it won't be their fault because the system will require it to be non-private. And that will lead to more than 22 a day. I think in the very near future, we are going to be wishing that we were back to just 22 veteran suicides a day, and that we were wishing that we were back to hearing less stories about children killing themselves and harming themselves. And you're really right about the family harm and the self-harm that is going to come out of this. And there's going to be family destruction in ways that we're not prepared for, in terms of kids with, say, severe autism, who are going to require support for the rest of their lives. If there's no system of support there at all, it doesn't leave a lot of choices for some parents. And we don't ever hear the numbers of family harm where a parent kills their kid and then themselves. We don't ever hear those numbers. And those numbers are going to go drastically up, even if we don't hear about them.
Because they will think it's the only way to save their child from a worse fate.
Yes.
Which is
horrible and horrifying.
Horrible, horrifying, but in this case, something to consider. I mean, look, I'm not suggesting it's something to consider that you should kill your child and yourself, but something to consider in the sense that they're doing this out of a sense of love and not out of a sense of
it's a sense of fear and love, and they don't know what to do, because we have made it in this country to be that way. Like, these are policy choices.
What do you say to people? Because I see some in our Substack chat, and I think it's a legitimate question. What do you say to people who walk down streets in American cities? We've done such a horrible job of treating drug addiction. We've done such a horrible job of treating mental health. Here in New York City, the former mayor of New York, Bill de Blasio, had $1 billion that he was supposed to spend on mental health that was squandered. So that you have an exploding population of people who are mentally ill on the streets of the city, and they do make people feel unsafe. And I can vouch for that, both on the streets and in the subway. What do you say to people who say we do have a mental health epidemic and there needs to be something done to institutionalize these people for their own good, but also for the good of the larger population that is scared of violent attacks? Somebody asked that in the Facebook, in our Substack.
No, I think that's a legitimately good question, and thank you for asking, because so I live in Arkansas and there's really not a lot of big city near me. That said, I used to live in and work in downtown Seattle, and Seattle also has a large homeless population. And I used to walk through one of the areas in Seattle that always had a really large homeless population. And I totally understand. I understand the fear. And the problem in my eyes aren't the people who are homeless or the people who are suffering, is that we've abandoned them. And I think the solution is we need to actually provide the services they need. And yes, sometimes that requires institutionalization. I am not against us having institutions that support people, that provide the care that they need. I am against keeping them against their will after they and their provider after they and their provider have said this person is ready to get the support that they need to come back, and here's the support that they need continuing in the community. And so we always lean to the most extreme cases in the country, and we always overreact in how we do things. At least from my opinion on it is I think we are very overreactive at times on how we deal with issues in our country. And criminalizing homelessness is not the right idea, is not the right thing. Increasing police presence for homelessness is not the right thing. I think we misread the opportunity with defund the police and that movement to actually create change for providing on the ground mental health care teams that respond and care providers that respond to situations that require a mental health professional and not a police officer, because that's not their job. They're not trained to provide mental health assistance. Police officers shouldn't be the ones responding directly to mental health crises because those situations escalate so quickly. And you need a professional who can de escalate that situation and knows what they're doing so that it doesn't become harmful for those around them. On the larger scale, though, for like in major cities where it's a where it is a problem, is I think we need to address the actual root cause of the issues, which is we don't have a social safety system in this country. And those people would not be homeless and would have the care that they need if we actually had a social safety system in this country that provided the healthcare support either through government assistance or private practice. There's a lot of nuance on how we could do, say, um, full universal healthcare system in this country. That would need to include universal mental health care as well. It would have to be whole body. And we've separated our healthcare into different segments of the body. So, like, we talk about mental disabilities, but we don't talk about physical disabilities at the same time. We don't talk about their interconnectedness. It's the same with teeth and eyes. Like, we treat everything so separately on our body. And I think the solution, a solution to the problem, or a way to at least get to the root cause, is we need to provide full social services for healthcare so that people aren't abandoned and left on the street to then live in crisis, because those people are living in crisis 24/7. And that's a terrible state to be in, especially if you have a mental disorder that is debilitating and causes you to lash out. You need help, and the fear is there. Absolutely. I've seen it. I've been around people who are really dangerous in that moment. And then I step back from it and I go, why are they dangerous in that moment? It's not because of me. It's not because of them specifically. It's they're in a situation of crisis all the time.
Yeah, and I think there's a stigma to mental health that is just that doesn't exist for physical health, right? It's
Mhm.
okay to say that you've got cancer, right? People are going to say, "Oh, I'm so sorry," and tell me about your chemo treatments, and tell me about your prognosis, and what stage are you, and so on and so forth. There is a much bigger stigma to saying, "Oh, I got diagnosed with bipolar disorder," or "I got,"
Mhm.
or just that I'm depressed, right? Like I worked in this, so I'm Generation X, and for my generation, I think as you get, I don't know how old you are, but for I think I feel like millennials talk about being in therapy much more openly. I feel like certainly Gen Z,
I'm a millennial, so yeah, I
yeah,
can attest to
right.
that.
My generation and certainly the Boomers, there's really a stigma to talking about getting therapy or getting help or and so on and so forth. And I remember working in the Senate, in the United States Senate, when I was in my, I guess, late 20s. I'm trying to think of when this was. I think this was about 2001. And there was a press conference. And it was I'll never forget it, of all the press conferences that I went to when I was down there, that my boss at the time was a senator, was attended. This one is the only one that really sticks out in my mind because it was Harry Reid, who at the time was the Senate Minority Leader, Ted Kennedy, John Corzine, who was my boss, who was a senator from New Jersey, John Edwards, who was at the time a senator from North Carolina, and a few others, and I can't remember who it was. And I think it was only Democrats, although I wish it hadn't been, who all got up and said, we need to treat mental health at parity with physical health. And here's all of our stories. And Harry Reid had a father who committed suicide.
Mhm.
Ted Kennedy obviously has that very famous sister, Rosemary Kennedy, that very famous story with the sister getting lobotomized because she had issues. I cannot remember what John Edwards' issue was, and to be honest, I can't remember what my old boss's family issue was. But the point is, everybody in their family had some sort of issue, and they wanted to talk about it openly, and it never went anywhere, which is such a regret for me that it never went anywhere. But it never went anywhere. Actually, Harry Reid at the time was not the Senate Majority Leader. Tom Daschle was, but he was in leadership. And here we are 30 years later, almost 25 years later, and we're kind of still stuck. I think we're kind of still stuck about treating mental health appropriately. And I promise you, when they start institutionalizing people, it will be on the grounds of mental health before they get to the physical disability, because that really is eugenics in their mind. So that's going to be the last thing they do. But mental health, that's easy, right? Oh, you've got mental health issues. You're a danger to society. We got to lock you up. Oh, you've got Trump derangement syndrome. Oh, that's not healthy. You might take a shot at the president then. We got to lock you up.
Yep.
And what is Trump? What is Trump derangement syndrome? Criticizing what you don't want to hear.
And we have to remember too, like, so I'm 36 years old. I'm a millennial. I'm mid, like towards younger millennial, I guess, but I fit in with the Gen Xers. I would be a Zennial in a lot of ways. I grew up before the internet, and that era. Like I can claim I'm older than Google, and my kids go, "Whoa, that's weird." And the ADA was signed. So the Americans with Disability Act, which you started off talking about, was signed into law by George H.W. Bush in 1990. My birth year. So it is as old as I am. 99.
You're making me feel old, but go ahead.
99 was when Olmstead happened. So I was 9 years old at the time. I was in school. And so it impacted schooling for kids that I went to school with too. Like it allowed and ended segregation. It took 223 out of our 250 years to end segregation. Like we talk about segregation only in terms of race, but we never talk about it in terms of disability. And that the disability community is often left out of discussions from all advocacy. And this is something that Naida and I talk about, is the advocacy of how do we actually get all of our communities to see these issues. And mental health is so stigmatized. It's stigmatized by older generations, but I also think we have reached a point in the way that we speak about mental health in our country as being gamified and not actually getting the help that you need. Is we have a lot of apps and services where you can get just that top level and say that you are seeing a therapist or say that you are getting support and that you're addressing needs, but you're never actually talking about the issues and the root causes, and you're never getting to really experience therapy. And you're not going to group therapy, you're not doing individual therapy, you're really just seeking that top level so that you can have this title or tag that you have seen a therapist, or I get to talk about it because I'm open about my mental health. We've gamified it in our generations, in millennials and younger. Like it's been turned into, can I get this badge that shows that I have it? And I think we have removed in some generations the stigma, but we've turned that stigma into something else. And we don't treat it in any way the same as physical disability or physical injury. And you're right on that. Is the last of the disabled group that will be institutionalized permanently are those who have prominent physical disabilities, because seeing the regime take a bunch of people in wheelchairs and with walkers, or who are amputees or are impacted just in a physical way, cerebral palsy, things like that, seeing the regime mass take those people and institutionalize them would be such a horrific scene that it would wake everybody up, and they know that. Um, but like you said, people with mental disabilities aren't seen in that way. And so just a simple diagnosis of PTSD could be seen as violent, or you are unwelcome in society. And the fake Trump derangement syndrome, where you speak out on the internet because for some reason you're deranged because Trump is in office, and it always makes you mad. Well, there you go. You're a danger. And so yeah, I think we need to break through the stigmatism, and we need to break through the gamification of it so that we can actually talk about what the real causes are, and that we're going to have more of it here soon. Like, we went through 20 years of an endless war in Iraq and Afghanistan. We're now back in war with Iran. Not that we weren't ever really stopping with that war. And we're going to have a new set of veterans who come back who have PTSD, who have anger issues and detachment issues. And I know I came back from my deployment in Afghanistan not the same person. I was angry all the time. All the time. I was angry at everything. And I sought out help, partially because my wife said to me, "You get help or I'm leaving." And I'm glad she did. She put her foot down, and I went and got the help. And I've continued to get that help. But now I look back on that, and can I say that will be used against me when it comes time, because I'm an outspoken veteran. And so we treat these disorders wrong and disabilities wrong in this country, and we like to make them invisible or put them out of sight, out of mind.
I think, Ms. Banks, you make a very good point about autism as a spectrum condition. There are people who you wouldn't even know are on the spectrum, right? Mm-hmm. And yet they are, and yet they have a diagnosis of Asperger's or autism. Not only high functioning, but I mean, Elon Musk clearly is on the spectrum, right? Like, I'm not going to diagnose him, but I think it's fairly obvious that he's got some sort of autism spectrum condition. And somebody like that, who's clearly successful, not in all the right ways, but nevertheless is. Mm-hmm. I want to kind of touch on something you said, because you said you were born in 1990, but I want to talk about kids who were born in 2001, who are not kids anymore, right? These are 25-year-olds. Mm-hmm. They have not known one day of peace. They were born into a war, mm-hmm. multiple wars. When they were young children, they watched their houses potentially being repossessed or their parents going broke because of the financial crisis in 2008. They graduated into recessions. They're now living through another war. I mean, I think about, I was born in the 70s, in the early 70s. And so I lived through the Cold War, but it wasn't like people really thought that the barbarians were at the gates with the Cold War. Like, everybody kind of understood, the Russians sucked, the Americans were trying to, but like, it wasn't for people who are my age in their 50s or older, you'll know what I'm talking about. And then I remember very clearly in the 90s under Bill Clinton, having this thought, and I remember exactly where I was, and I was in my mid-20s at the time, thinking, this is a really good time to be alive, right? Like, the biggest scandal we had was whether the president, had gotten a blowjob in the Oval Office. Like, as far as scandals go, like, that's not a bad one to have. And now, if you're a 25-year-old, everything about your life is high stress.
Yes.
And you have a Whoop or an Oura ring that's going to tell you whether that's true or not. And I guarantee you, it's so conditioned that you know it. If you're not seeing a therapist to deal with just daily living, I would be surprised. And that's the condition that our government has created for us, successive government, actually, starting with the Bush administration, ending with this one. And yet, and I'll put onus on Democrats as well, they're not investing Nick seems to be gone again, but they're not investing in getting people the help they need to deal with the problems that our governments have created for us, the wars that they got us into, the financial crises that they should have seen coming, the outcome of that financial crisis where nobody was held to account, but yet people lost their house and lost their savings. And we're asking COVID, my God, all the kids who had to miss school because of COVID and the socialization that has to deal with that and the isolation and the fear of death. And despite creating and mismanaging all of these crises, and all of these crises were mismanaged, we're asking people to deal with this on their own. And then when they're dealing with it on their own, they now have to worry about the risk of being locked up against their will because they're trying to help and get the help they need. I mean, this is such a crisis, you guys. This is such an issue. And I'm so glad that Nick and I were talking about this. It's just something that I think we need to consider and think about. And yes, Ms. Binks, massive job elimination, taking away healthcare coverage and providers right now. I mean, by the way, the taking healthcare coverage away, wait until after this election's over, because that's really when the bad effects of the big, beautiful bill, quote unquote, kick in, the healthcare impacts. It's not that they just got rid of, the subsidies for Obamacare. They did that. But now if you're on Medicaid, which means that if you are somebody who's either in a nursing home or your parents are getting help through a nursing home. I mean, Medicaid doesn't just apply to people who are impoverished, although it does. It also applies to a lot of people who are getting nursing home care and others, end-of-life care. And all of that is about to go goodbye. And when you think about that, one on top of the other, absolutely right, Dustin Cat, one crisis piled up on top of another. And not only are we not giving people help, but more relevantly, we're putting the onus on people to think about whether they should get help, if they're able to get help. Because they're now afraid that if they do get help, that's going to be held against them and with really bad consequences. And the part that infuriates me is, I mentioned him earlier, Tom Kean Jr., a Republican from New Jersey, when he was a state senator, voted against paid family leave for mental health, among other things, for all kinds of issues, including mental health. If any one of us had disappeared from work and still got their entire salary for 3 months and didn't explain where we were to our boss, we would have been fired. And yet he just disappeared for 3 months, went to get help, did not tell anybody until he came back. Taxpayers continue to pay salary, and he's not explaining to people beyond the fact that he was getting treatment where he was and what he was doing. I'm all for him getting help. I'm all for him getting that treatment, but he doesn't have to worry about being locked up as a result. And yet, that's exactly what's happening. We've been at this for about 45 minutes, and I think Nick's internet is out. So I don't really know how much more I want to add to this, other than I'm going to, once again, put this link into the chat. I want everybody to visit this website, and I want everybody to please pay attention to this, because this is important. And it's something that we all need to consider, all of us. Naida Green is, along with Nick, one of the leaders of this movement. I want everybody to please visit Naida and certainly subscribe to Nick's Substack, Nick Paro, if you're not already, because this is so important. And for anybody who asked, why didn't I have Naida Green on? Naida is more than welcome to come on anytime. Nick reached out to me and asked if he could come on. And I'm so glad that he did. And I'm so glad that he helped to amplify this issue. Of course, Naida is more than welcome. I think she's in the chat. Naida, please. I'd love to do another one of these with you, because I want to keep talking about this. In fact, I might write about this as well, because I think this is so, so critically important. Friends, I want to end this with the way that I started it. Either you or somebody that you love would be classified as disabled by this administration, or is classified as disabled for purposes of getting extra time on tests, If you're dyslexic or you've got ADHD, I mean, things that are so commonplace. I mean, if anybody here has kids, either your kid is, has this issue or your kid's friend has this issue. I promise you. And yet we're basically not only cutting funding for this, but we're discouraging people from reporting issues that need to be addressed because God knows they might have derangement syndrome to go along with their ADHD, which means that they need to be locked up. And now they've already been marked down as needing accommodation or having a disability. And so therefore it's going to be that much easier to institutionalize them against their will. Okay, on that very depressing note, I want to thank Nick, who I think is probably dealing with internet issues at the moment. I want to thank Naida Green for shining a light on this. I think she's in the chat, so thank you for doing this. And I also want to ask people to visit the websites that both Naida and I put in the chat. If anybody is going to be around at 2 p.m. Eastern, Michelle Kinney and Dana Dubois and I are doing another live, this one about how absolutely horrible and difficult it is to be a woman in this moment. Graham Plattner is the least of it. So we're going to be doing that. So come back at 2 p.m. It's not going to be another happy topic. We're going to do one soon. When the news gets better, we'll do something happy, but I want people to focus on this as well. So on that note, thank you to Nick. Thank you to Naida. Thank you to the movement that they've created to shine a light on this. Thank you to everybody who joined. And on that note, see you guys at 2 p.m. today. Bye.